Okay, I have started recording. Can you talk to make sure that I can see the little lines moving?
Okay.
Yay, the green lines move on my thing, which means that Jesus. Well, let's now we've started. Let's just say that this is the official start of things. You know, because it's not live anyway. I could because I have about all my old streaming stuff still set up. I could
Yeah.
technically put this live, but I haven't used that account in years, so I am not
Hmm.
going to do that. But welcome, Jack, to the show.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
First episode of season two. Not live.
It's an honor.
Not it's Thank you also for stepping in on such short notice. Normally, I like to have a guest prepared by so when the show is recorded on a Sunday. I prefer to have a guest locked in by Wednesday. However, um, the person who was originally I was going to ask you to come on next week, but due to the person who was supposed to be on right now pulling out at the last second without even telling me, everything is in a crazy order. But thank you for stepping in on short
Yo,
notice.
thank you for having me. It's an honor.
I mean, how busy are you these days? Because I know that, and we'll get onto this later, but I know that you had a very important internship, a very prestigious internship, and that's concluded now. I believe.
Yeah, so I just finished an internship with the Office of Governor Phil Scott, and so I was honored to fulfill that role in Vermont for about I think from like September to about January. And so, yeah, now I'm continuing to kind of look for opportunities within public policy and kind of government. But I was also thinking maybe education as well as kind of a career route to kind of go down too. So I've been looking at master's programs for that as well. So, yeah.
I mean, it's a tough world these days. I were you so you were there for from September to January. That's about 5 months? Were you getting paid for that work, or was that just normal like unpaid internship stuff?
That was an unpaid internship that I did. So yeah, I did like a lot of like kind of various kind of projects and like constituent service work and stuff for the governor, like research and quantitative like analytics and stuff too. So it was pretty insightful, and so I was kind of looking for experience, and it definitely kind of gave me that. Now that I'm kind of out of that program, I'm looking for more kind of like a lucrative and like more opportunities to really kind of like advance my career and stuff. So. I've been looking kind of like within like Vermont and also kind of like my home state in New York. So
Yeah, so you're from upstate New York, from you said Albany,
yeah.
and do you still live in Albany, or are you now? I understand you went to college, as the Americans call it, or do you? I still haven't figured this out. Do you call it college or do you call it university?
It kind of depends on the person. And also like the school. Like my brother, for example, goes to the University of Albany. Um, but I went to Castleton. I guess I went to Castleton University, so that would be a university too. But I feel like college is kind of like the informal thing people say, you know?
Yeah, and so you
So I
went to
mean,
college in, or well, whatever it was in Vermont, right? Or was it?
yeah, so I was recruited originally to wrestle at Castleton University, and so I wrestled there for 4 years. And
Okay.
yeah, I competed at the college Division 3 level, so it's
And and
pretty cool.
NCAA, right, is the particular governing body to that.
I'd have to look, but I believe so.
Yeah, and see, I mean,
It's Division 3, so
yeah.
I don't
So
know.
probably NCAA at this point, right?
Yeah,
But now you're well, unless you do go into a master's, you are sort of for the time being out of education, right? You're officially, I guess, supposedly in the job market, right? How
yeah,
are you finding that experience? Because a lot of people that I've spoken to, who are either about to graduate or have just graduated or are looking to take a year off of university to do a placement, are having a really tough time with things. Are you finding any of that over in America, or are you just necessarily being a little bit more picky, which is why you've not got something at the moment?
It's definitely challenging in different kind of like I guess like career paths and stuff. One of the reasons why I've decided to look into education, for example, is because like especially now, like work within like the federal government or kind of like is kind of scarce, especially with the Trump administration. And so a lot of people like, including myself, was pursuing something maybe within that kind of like career path, kind of like I don't know, there isn't as much opportunity unless like you go into something like the like CIA or kind of like Department of like Homeland Security or something for like ICE or whatever. So that's not something that I ultimately think I would want to do. So it definitely like depends kind of like on I know for example like tech sector jobs and stuff too is particularly having like a difficult time right now, especially with the implementation of like AI. And so it's definitely like challenging to find, especially entry level roles. A lot of the positions that I see within like for example like state government or kind of like local government like require multiple years of experience, which is something that, you know, as an entry level person like you don't really kind of have unless like you kind of like build upon that. That's one of the reasons why I tried to pursue an internship was because you know it's experience I could ultimately put on a resume, especially within like an executive office. And so I felt like that would definitely give me more connections. Things that I found was that like connections are kind of like pretty much everything. Most of the positions that I'm currently pursuing right now are through connections either in Vermont or New York, and so it's definitely very important to have that. But like if you don't really have it, it's really challenging to really kind of find anything. So
Yeah,
but I know for example like in education like certain positions like you know that they're definitely like hiring. So like that's one of the reasons why I've decided. Both of my parents are art teachers for the state of New York, and so one of the reasons why I've decided to kind of look into education is because like I've always kind of grown up like around it. So I kind of like know what it kind of entails and kind of like what that lifestyle is, and I think it's incredibly rewarding and important work. And I think ultimately that would be really fulfilling if I did decide to pursue that as well. So.
yeah,
It's a hard decision between policy and education. They're both very important career fields, and I think they're both really interesting. So,
yeah. I mean, given you majored in history with a minor in political science, it's a lot of people who it's a very popular route to either go into government or go into education with stuff like that. And certainly, yeah, a lot of what you said resonates. You know, notoriously, education is a very stable job to get into. Whereas, especially now, again, as you said, with the Trump administration, which has seemingly made it where seemingly the number one mission is to cut back on government spending, on the amount of people that work for the government, which is certainly very interesting considering as much as lit- the Republican Party sort of advertises itself as more small government. It's been interesting to see that up until really this administration, they haven't followed that idea of not expanding, of not continually expanding government power. Right? I don't. As well as an American who studied history, can you really think of any administrations where they really focused this much on cutting back on government, as they would say, government waste, but as someone would just look at as government spending?
yeah, so I kind of have to think about that. I think one of the things that kind of jumps out kind of to me is like maybe like under like President Reagan with his kind of like privatization of like different kind of you know fields and stuff like that, or just kind of you know in general like deregulation and everything. Um, That's one thing that kind of jumps out to me. One thing that I do think that is pretty interesting though is like in regards to our conversation about like hiring and stuff too, with state government. State government too is undergoing kind of like a very difficult time to really kind of like I guess operate and kind of like really kind of work within the Trump administration. And so cooperation between like different agencies and like departments is like definitely something that's like kind of more of an emphasis right now within state government as like funds and stuff like that are like hard to kind of come by or just kind of like it's more challenging to kind of really like govern so like
Yeah.
effectively.
And I
And
guess you would
so, but
have a good perspective on that, having recently worked for, again, the governor of Vermont. What's in that role? What were your sort of responsibility? What first of all, what does the state governor really do, right? That you were able to see, and what sort of role did you have? What sort of interesting stories can you tell us? How was it basically? Because it's a very weighty title, governor. But what actually goes on in that type of office?
yeah, so I mean specifically in the governor's office, like it's very like broad. They encompass like state government encompasses like a lot of like different kind of things. Like for example, like there's different agencies and stuff like the bureaucratic system and stuff like tackles like different kind of issues and stuff and usually kind of manages like funds and like policy or whatever and kind of like directives that hope to like kind of like benefit the state and stuff like that. So like for example, like the Department of Labor, for example, would be kind of like in charge of like workforce development or kind of like employment like protection stuff or like working with businesses to like kind of like benefit like employees or like businesses in general.
And those
So like
departments, would
different
they
kind
be
of
run on the state level or on the federal level?
the state has agencies. I mean, there's a Department of Labor, obviously, like in the federal government too, but the state government is specifically like responsible for that state. And so the federal government broadly oversees the entire kind of like government. And so a lot of times like the federal government will like try to like fund things or like do programs and stuff or work with kind of like state like agencies or departments to kind of provide those like benefits and stuff. um yeah, so like state government really kind of like can like broadly encompass like a lot of things at the governor's office too. A lot of it too is like kind of like legislation and kind of tracking things or kind of like proposing policies and directives. I know, for example, right now the governor Phil Scott is focusing heavily on healthcare, as healthcare in like the state of Vermont has become like incredibly hard to kind of come by. It's and kind of incentivized. I know, for example, during my time, there was a case of Medicare Advantage, which is like a federal program that pulled out of Vermont during that time period, which garnished like a lot of like I guess like negative, attention,
Negative
especially
public
because a
sentiment,
lot of
yeah.
elderly people lost their health care. And so it's a challenging because like for example, Medicare Advantage is all federal, so the state really didn't have like much of a say in kind of like obviously we would prefer to have healthcare and stuff. So like, but in that specific kind of like instance and stuff, like the Scott administration right now is focusing like on like healthcare as like a policy and kind of legislative kind of focus to really kind of incentivize companies and health insurers to come back to the state. So like that's like an example of kind of like one like an issue and kind of like how exactly like the governor's office would kind of like interact with that and kind of like try to do something about it. Additionally, to like a lot of its funding, like the state like budget and stuff like that. Right now, it's a legislative session, so like they're trying to come to a conclusion on the budget, which would in turn like kind of really drastically affect kind of the outlook of the state and like what each agency would really kind of want to pursue during this time. So it really is kind of broad. There's a lot of things that like happens in state government, but I think it's really interesting because it's more kind of like localized. Like it's not like the federal government where it's like broadly the entire country, but like it's specifically like to kind of like a state and like I liked it because it's you feel more connected to kind of like communities and stuff that like you're involved in or kind of see on like a daily basis, and I think that's way more interesting. So
Yeah, it's easy from if you're governing the country on the federal level, you've got your office in Washington, D.C., you're really sort of isolated from the issues, and with the broad stroke of a pen, you can change a lot and affect a lot of people for good or for bad without really seeing the effects. But yeah, local, especially in a state like Vermont, which is probably going to be bottom five by area. If I had to, oh no, it's it's just outside the bottom five. New Hampshire's smaller. Damn. But you're having to see things on a much more local scale, and you're having to deal directly with the consequences. And I imagine that even and there are tiers of you have the county level, right? Is that something you pay much attention to? Because I know you said you wanted to go into public policy. Which sort of area Is your experience working in state government something that you think is now going to be an ideal for you, or do you have more ambition to go on the federal level or on the local level?
Yeah, so I mean specifically, I guess I like the state level a lot in kind of like looking at kind of like how like policies and stuff. In terms of like local government and stuff, like sometimes I will kind of follow what is like happening and stuff like on a local level. I mean, it's kind of interesting to kind of like see what's going on within like kind of like different kind of like counties or like boards and towns and stuff. But most of my attention is mostly like on the state and federal level, I feel like. And as far as like career ambitions and stuff, eventually, I mean, ideally, I would like to go into the federal government in like a position like in the foreign service or something. I particularly am interested in like foreign policy and foreign affairs. I enjoy like traveling, like international cultures and stuff. So something that I kind of want to eventually move into. In terms of policy too, I have a connection to education specifically. So education policy is something that I would also kind of want to maybe pursue as well. So I've looked into opportunities to kind of like do that as kind of really look, further my career and stuff and kind of move into a position where I'd feel like I'd be able to have more of an impact in a field that I'd be passionate in. So
Yeah, plus I guess working in the foreign service sector, right? That's not an elected position, so I imagine there's a lot less scrutiny on you, right? Like, for example, like let's say 30 years from now, you were trying to run for office. Especially nowadays in the age of the internet, every single media appearance you've ever made in your life is all of a sudden being scrutinized. You'd probably get, it would be good for me, I'd get like hundreds of thousands of people listening to this, right? But they'd be sort of hanging on your every word. But I mean, and also I guess in the foreign service sector, yes, it seems like I'm looking right now at the Wikipedia page for a list of ambassadors from the United States to China, right? And it seems like basically no matter what, you get 3 years. You're not having the same. You're not having to deal with the same 24-hour news cycle, wondering if your job is still going to be in your own hands, right? It's a lot less. It's a lot less politicized because really you're less of a policy making guy and more of a communicator. You're having to interpret the words of the dude above you. I I assume either the president or what's that role that Marco Rubio's in right now? I know he's got a billion different jobs going on, but what's his official home? I understand that the British equivalent is
he's got
Home
like
Secretary,
a lot of different response. I have to look it up real
Secretary of
quick
State,
because I
Secretary of State.
yeah.
Yeah, where and I at least some of these job titles that people have are normally very confusing, but from what I do understand, Secretary of State is basically you're the guy in charge of foreign relations, right? I I
Mhm.
I hope I haven't just I've so far I've only messed up majorly on this show once with something I've said, so I'm trying to at least keep. I'm let's say I'm batting 900. I'm trying to keep that above 850. You know, I can maybe 3 episodes from now I can make a blunder. For the time being, I'm trying to avoid it, right?
Hmm.
But so how, although with this foreign foreign again, I'm only thinking of whatever the British phrase is, right? Within the foreign service, as a civil servant, isn't a lot of that also connections? How do you see yourself, or do you even see yourself being able to get into that space very easily?
It's very challenging. That's one of the reasons why I've also kind of looked into education because I feel like it's more realistic. As far like as of right now. But yeah, like the process of becoming a foreign service agent, like officers, is very like challenging. It's very rigorous. You have to take a test and stuff and examinations. There's like a verbal like interviews and stuff as well. The selection process is very like selective. It's very few kind of eventually kind of go into it. So and even still like the work that you do in the foreign service is still like challenging, it's you're in a foreign country, and sometimes like those countries are obviously like don't have the best like infrastructure, kind of like different kind of systems and stuff to really kind of you know live
Although
like
this is
comfortably
one
or just
thing,
whatever. So like
although
it's there's
one thing I do know for certain is that
yeah.
if you are working in any sort of if you are working in any sort of ambassadorial role, whether you are as an American ambassador abroad, whether you are simply working in the embassy or working in the consulate, unless you are specifically considered to be a local contractor or an independent contractor, you do get hazard pay.
Mhm.
You get extra. So, for example, if you're the American ambassador to Yemen, you're getting paid a little. Well, you get slightly more per diem if you're in the UK, obviously because things are more expensive in London, or as we would both know in Brighton, it's pricey down here. But if you're in Yemen, I believe you get more take-home pay because obviously, you're having to, if you've got a family, you're having, no matter what, you're having to put them through a lot. Either you're going abroad and you're not really seeing them, or you're bringing them with you to such an extremely different place where they might unfortunately feel unsafe for whatever reason. And in certain places, as we've seen before with Afghanistan, or most notably with the situation in Iran in, I think, the 80s, where all of the Americans had to evacuate the embassy and go stay with the Canadians for a bit. You can have to, at the drop of a hat, completely have to abandon your life again. And that's got to be an incredibly stressful situation. So it only does, it does make sense that obviously they get more pay, but at the same time, is that going to be worth it?
Are you asking like if I
Yeah,
would be willing to?
would you personally consider, like, let's say you were an up and coming civil servant, right? And you knew that you were in line to get an ambassador gig somewhere, right? And you're probably thinking of somewhere cushy like Slovenia, where you can live in a nice place. If you were, say, offered the Yemen gig, or actually, that's probably the most appropriate one I can think of right now. Let's say you were offered the Yemen gig. What do you think?
I do like I would be interested. Like honestly, I do like I am interested in like cultures and like people and stuff. I think that would be interesting and stuff to kind of serve like in a country like that. However, I'm a type 1 diabetic, so I don't really think that I would be able to be really sent to like a place like that. As far as like people that I talk to or whatever that are in the foreign service, they say that's not really much of an issue. I don't really exactly know how realistic that is though. So one of the things that I mean, teaching in New York, for example, provides like excellent healthcare and benefits and stability, which is something that ultimately that I would need, which is the reason why I've decided to kind of pursue that. So
Yeah, but
yeah.
other than in the sort of diplomatic sector, what other roles can you see yourself working in government? Because I've seen, thankfully, you've been probably the best in terms of actually giving me information to work with out of anyone I've ever had on. Which, thank you, right? But I can see that you were at your university. Ah, so it is a university, not a college. Right? But at
Yeah.
your university, you were in your student government association congress, right? What does
Yeah.
that entail? What do you think that sort of prepared you for? And yeah, basically, tell us about that.
Yeah, so actually, one of the main reasons why I decided to go into to kind of policy and government was because of my experience in student government. Originally, like uh, I was going for education. I didn't really like wasn't really thinking that I would go into it. However, I had like a friend who was involved in student government and was like, oh, like you should like do this like position. It was like just basically like a court position. And so like I got involved on like the student court and ended up like really enjoying it. So like eventually I decided to like pursue elections and stuff like that. I ran for office as a delegate and then like in the Congress basically at my university. I ended up winning my election, and so I served, and I basically like I ended up staying there for about like my the rest of my time, like 3 years and stuff, like through like elections and different things too. So in that time period, I was involved in multiple committees. My university too was going through a difficult merger at the time into the Vermont State University colleges, and so it was particularly a tumultuous time because it was very like uncertain. And so our student government did like a lot of work to really kind of represent our student body. We issued like statements of for example, our president had plans to uh, like got our library, for example. That's something that our student body did not agree with, and so we voiced those concerns to basically our leadership and stuff like that. So we did like a lot of work like that. I was on the finance, food, academic, and like dance committees. For example, I got over like $24,000 in special like projects that the student government kind of like felt that we needed like done and stuff, including like new furniture for a dining hall or kind of like things like our wrestling mats, for example, were in not good shape. Our wrestling team is nationally ranked, so it's something that we should like kind of uphold. And so I took on like projects like that, and so I got like a lot of stuff done through that, and I kind of realized that like I really do like enjoy kind of like making a difference and stuff like that, especially like within communities, like providing things or kind of like being involved in government and like civics. And so I decided to kind of like maybe pursue that, and so I decided to change mine to just like a political science, and then eventually pursue the governor's internship to gain further experience in actual like tangible like government. And I think that it was really rewarding. It was really insightful, and I learned a lot. And so it's definitely something that was really rewarding. So I
Yeah. I
don't
mean,
know. Did you?
student government can be a very interesting place. Uh,
Yeah.
this is actually,
Yeah.
considering this is the first episode I'm doing where it's not broadcast live, I am allowed to say, like, there's a lot of weird stuff always going on with the Students' Union at Sussex University, right? Normally, that's one of my three rules on my show is no politics, kind of, like, don't express political opinions too much, don't talk about football, and don't say the words student union because they are particularly litigious, right? But because this isn't live, I can say it's kind. I sort of wish maybe there were more people like you at our university who are willing and able to make a change in a positive direction for once. Like it feels like the only time I ever hear about our students' union now is when it's something negative, which is sort of a bit. It's a bit. I'd rather not hear about the student union at all than have to constantly hear, or not necessarily constantly. I don't want to give off the impression that they're like always doing things bad, but only ever hear about them when something's going wrong, and for that to be more than once a year. I mean, particularly recently, Sussex University ended up in the news, and not for a good reason, because um, uh, it was recently the Sussex Students' Union allowed for the creation of a new society, to basically to be like a youth wing of the Reform UK political party, right? Which is a sort of up and coming. I don't know how old they are. I don't think they're that old, considering some of their party leadership, some of their party leaders have been sort of bouncing around parties for ages now, right? But you know, and immediately after it was approved, every group chat I'm in to do with the university is starting to blow up with information about this, people voicing their concerns, protests were organized. But then, and I guess this is sort of an interesting case study in how the internet affects political polarization, but you had so many people on the news, so many people on social media backing the Sussex University Reform Society. Then on their Instagram post, you had 1,100 comments of people. It might sound harsh, but effectively they were maybe not hateful, but they were being rude, let's say, in the comments of this of the new society. And yet, when the day came when they were supposed to showcase, when the Reform Society was supposed to have their first public appearance, and when there was a protest organised against this public appearance, it sort of felt like nothing happened. You know, the Reform Society turned up to their event for about 10 minutes, and then, despite getting over 1,100 comments on Instagram, the protest lasted for less than half the time it was supposed to, and they had really, and maybe my perspective on protest sizes is skewed considering some of the stuff I've seen in Hong Kong, right? If anybody knows how to protest, it's us. But it really felt like the attendance was pitiful. And even compared to protests I've seen on the university campus in my now 2.5 years here, I've seen better. I've seen certainly better, and it's all just a bit weird how everyone is able to talk a big game online, especially when it comes to politics. And there's a lot of, and I don't want to make out that dangerous things haven't happened in real life. I mean, we saw assassination just off the top of my head, the whole Charlie Kirk situation. I mean, a man is dead now, but it feels like we should, in general, try to recognize that maybe in real life we are not as crazy as we would like to make out online. And I've completely gone off topic from the original point about student unions, but yeah, it is just a weird thing, student politics. What it can do to people.
Yeah, I mean, it's there's definitely like a tendency. I mean, I know, for example, at my university, there was like our student government sometimes what were like heavily criticized by like our student body, or people oftentimes were uninformed or kind of like didn't really know what we did, or just generally kind of like critical of the stuff that we do, which I mean it's just a part of kind of like being like in government and stuff like that too. Like not everyone's going to oftentimes be supportive of like what you're trying to get done, or kind of like what kind of is happening. And so, I mean, really, it's just kind of like a part of it. And so, I mean, I honestly, being involved in student government like really kind of helped me, especially kind of become more engaged with like my community, which is something that was very like I guess rewarding and really kind of nice. And so, I mean, it's definitely has like can have like a transformative kind of impact and stuff. And so, like, I mean, if ever like people ever wanted to get involved or whatever, like definitely go for it. I mean, student government is definitely like a very great thing to really kind of be involved in your community, like even like on like a basic level. But yeah, in terms of like societies and stuff too, like I know at Castleton we had like a Turning Point USA chapter that was just like accepted too, which met like a lot of backlash. And I'm not on the university campus anymore, so I don't really know exactly like what transpired, but like I know, for example, that like protests like were happening and stuff specifically with that. And so yeah, it's definitely like a tumultuous time, especially within like student like politics and societies and like organizations. And so I mean, yeah, but definitely like I don't know. Yeah, I definitely see that here in the United States, like your observation and stuff too, with kind of like how people really say stuff. But I mean, I think that like what's happening like Minnesota, for example, is like a good example of kind of like real kind of like protesting, and like how exactly like engaging within kind of like civics and kind of like really finding a voice is really kind of important. It can really kind of enact change when like that change is really kind of organized and directed and kind of to a really effective
Yeah,
way.
Minnesota. Yeah,
And so
especially these days, Minnesota. I mean, it's also sort of a good example that sort of voices on either side of the political spectrum can enact change. I mean, just from that one, whatever the guy's name was who made that first YouTube video about alleged fraud, right? Immediately, the political will that was behind his quote unquote findings was enormous. And then on the other side, when immigration and customs enforcement started showing up, the immediate political will on the other side, and the immediate sort of change where the DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, were having to be more wary, where suddenly the governor's getting involved and the governor is attempting to push back against against the federal government. It's very interesting that both
mm,
sides simultaneously are capable of enacting change in such a small space and in such a small period of time. But on it, and I'm not trying to make light of the situation in Minnesota because obviously there's been a lot of tragedy, but almost some of this stuff feels a little cartoonish every once in a while with this whole situation. Like a place getting millions of dollars of government funding every year has a misspelled sign above the door. You know, like they can't like it's supposed to be a daycare, but they can't spell the word learning properly. And then you have a woman give an interview where she says fraud is bad, and then immediately gasps and has to step away from the podium. Like what is happening in the world? You know, everything just feels so much weird. But I guess it's also the internet. I mean, the amount of times like I'll open Instagram and I'll see either Charlie Kirk's face or, for example, or even like Benjamin Netanyahu, Jeffrey Epstein, or George
JD
Floyd
Vance or something.
put in completely irrelevant situations. Like I've got a notification on my phone right now. I bet you if I open it, yeah, it's Jeffrey Epstein and P. Diddy as cats on a yacht, and then they get shipwrecked. Like, what is happening to the world? Why is they people spoke as if AI was going to change the way we live, and I think it has, but it's just made everything worse. Like, it's like that meme where our brains are shrinking. You know, like what's your
Yeah.
take on this whole AI thing? How has that affected you at all, or has it affected people you've seen? What's going on? You know, what's your take on all this?
On AI, I think that AI can have like the have a potential of being like extremely transformative and positive in a lot of ways. Like you know, compiling information, like it can like instantaneously like give you kind of like I guess an entire analysis of like a subject, like whatever you really want, which is like is definitely like a really powerful thing, like tool to have. In terms of like how it's being used, I don't know. I think that in certain aspects it can be pretty like destructive, like
I mean, the energy
especially like
consumption and the water consumption is off the
yeah,
charts.
yeah, it's definitely impacting like communities and like you know the environment definitely, which is a negative. Um, yeah, so in terms of like tech and stuff too, like I know like a lot of like stuff too is like Meta and stuff like is trying to like you know engage with you and like keep you like on that app for example, which I think that like in that kind of way too it's like incredibly like kind of like destructive and stuff as well, you know, and kind of irresponsible. I i don't really know. I feel like it's one of those like tough subjects because on one hand that like AI is a critical, you know, technology that was like designated by like the federal government and stuff. So it's like something that they consider to like be like important like within like the future and like maintaining like American like kind of power and kind of abroad and stuff
Sort of
and kind of
economic
like with
supremacy. I know it's been considered very key.
yeah.
Recently,
And so
I listened to a podcast appearance from the CEO of Nvidia, Jensen Huang, and it was interesting to hear his insights as also it's just when I first heard about Nvidia sort of 10 years ago, it was as a gaming company, pretty much. But
yeah.
now they're sort of on the forefront of this AI push. And it was interesting to hear how much importance the federal government is placing on AI. I've heard it compared to, I've heard the modern race for AI supremacy be compared to the race for the nuclear bomb or the space race, and I think it's similar in its potential destructive quality, but also in the potential to do good. Like, I think, I hope that it doesn't negatively impact the job market at all. I know that a lot of previous technological advancements haven't been, obviously a lot of tech has done great for people, but when tech is introduced that makes it more and more difficult to justify keeping people in their jobs, I'm sort of against that, you know. It sort of seems as a potential means of funneling more and more wealth into the hands of the 1%. But again, yeah, but on the other hand, like with, for example, at a hospital that's understaffed, you know, it might, in its current state, obviously, it's not nearly as good as an actual doctor, but maybe 20 years from now, if we're unable to solve our current shortage of medical professionals, it's better than letting a guy have to wait 17 hours for an appointment, you know. But it's sort of like everything else in the world, and especially in politics or economics where I can see it going either way, you know.
Yeah, I think too, like, you mentioned like jobs and stuff. Like, obviously, like I'm kind of like on the forefront because I'm currently experiencing like this labor market, and with AI, and I think a lot of it is due to like uncertainty. I think like a lot of like companies specifically as well, don't exactly know really kind of what to make of it too, and in a lot of ways is kind of not willing to take on like new hires or just kind of like really kind of expand their companies because they don't really know if they need the jobs or really kind of like all the people or to really have to train people anymore. So like I don't know, I think that uncertainty is like really kind of like impacting a lot of people. Yeah, like you said, it's just I don't know. It's kind of like one of those subjects that like is complicated. I don't know. It's kind of hard to come to a conclusion that's like clear, black and white. So
Yeah, I mean, but yeah, especially with this job market, man. I know a guy who's graduating soon. He was on the show before, uh, and he's done God knows. I've seen him do God knows how many job interviews. And he's got a good CV, and he's very competent in the field that he's trying to get into. And he can hardly get past certain interview rounds. And then once he does make it to the final round, and it's a big problem now, it turns out that the job wasn't even real. Because the government gives out tax breaks to companies that say that they're hiring. But all you have to do is post a job, show that you interviewed a couple people, and then suddenly you can say, actually, we've decided we don't need this position and open up a new position. And it still counts. It's a very interesting time for both of us, I guess, that I'm a year away or 18 months away from
mm,
entering the job market myself. It feels like we are sort of entering the world as adults in the worst time in modern memory to do that. Other than like in times where there was like war, right? Economically, this feels like a very bad time to try and enter the workforce because even compared to the global financial crisis, right? Nowadays, it's more difficult to get a job. Once you do get a job on a relative scale, you're not getting paid nearly as much. Everything is more expensive, so it's much more difficult for you to save money. Then once you save money, anything that you need to be saving money for, such as, let's say, a kid's college fund or buying property, that's getting more expensive at a much higher rate than the increase of your own salary. And even if you do manage to get the money for a house, being able to get a good one is much more difficult because of the loosening of regulations and the increasing prevalence of companies like BlackRock and Blackstone who view houses as an investment commodity rather than as a place to live, entering the market and just vacuuming up properties. And I don't want to sound, I'd like to consider myself a more positive guy, but it's not looking good. It's really not looking good.
yeah, I mean, in America right now, we're definitely facing kind of similar problems. And yeah, I think a lot of people are definitely kind of, growing very anxious of kind of like the current realities that we're facing. It's a challenging time to really kind of enter into like, the world, I guess. So, I mean, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. I it's definitely something that I mean everyone's gonna have to kind of struggle and adapt. I feel like, Um, I know, yeah, I don't know, it definitely is challenging. I mean, to kind of like stay optimistic in such kind of like a very, you know, uh, negative time. So,
Yeah.
but I think, for example, pointing back to like Minnesota, for example, kind of like the change and kind of like that they were able to kind of achieve is kind of at least like a glimmer of hope of like, like what like real kind of like collective action or just real kind of like, grassroots kind of like democracy can like really kind of achieve. I don't know. I think that
Yeah, I mean,
ultimately,
we've seen recently, most prominently, at least in my memory, are the scenes we saw in Nepal, for example, last year, where it was called the sort of Gen Z. They were called the Gen Z protests because they were, and as much as they were on a massive scale throughout the country, they were
Mm.
primarily organized by Gen Z. And information was being spread on social media, and it felt like a real grassroots movement. But it was very interesting that we didn't get sort of much media coverage of that in the West, you know. And obviously, the sort of conspiracy brain in anyone would be saying, "Oh, they don't want you to know that you can just do that." But it was crazy in as much as Nepal is a less significant country on a global scale, the fact that there was really very little coverage of it. In fact, some of the best documentation that we got for the early stages of the protests were from a random guy who was trying to cycle through the country. Oh no, he had to fly to Nepal and he was going to cycle to Thailand. And he's like a cycling YouTuber. And he suddenly just ends up in the country right as stuff is kicking off. And he just ends up in the middle of everything for a couple of days. And he did a great job documenting it. But I'd be very interested, and as because things sort of seem like they're heating up with the amount of increased violence we're seeing in the West, and with the increased polarization politically. Although again, we have seen on occasion that that is just the internet doing its thing. I'd be very interested to see if anything like that ends up happening in the West, some sort of large scale. Actually, we are seeing it. How could I forget? I was literally in Serbia back in October and I happened to walk past massive protests, and
Wow.
they're still
What was that
ongoing.
like?
It was very interesting. I went to Serbia because I wanted to watch Serbia play Albania in a very important football game because those two countries hate each other, you know. And basically, the winner has a chance to go into the World Cup, and the loser's just done. Right. So I end up in Serbia, and I meet a buddy, and I'm going to meet a buddy of mine, a Serbian friend of mine, to go watch this game, right? Because we couldn't watch it at the stadium because the government was afraid of protests, so they moved the venue to the middle of nowhere, and they only let like a couple hundred people in who were like friends of the state, right? But as I'm walking through the main square in the capital of Serbia, Belgrade, on the night of this football match, there were just like a few hundred people in the square just protesting.
Hmm.
And these protests, I don't know how long they've been. They've been going on since November 2024. They're still ongoing from what I know. Um, and it's crazy. Like I happen to know multiple Serbians, which is surprising, considering I don't know anyone from a lot of those other neighboring countries. But it's interesting the amount of depth to these protests in Serbia, and the amount of things that are going on with it. Like for example, there's an entire area of Belgrade now which is nicknamed Chachi Land, which is, I don't know what it translates to, but it's something to do with paid counter protesters, where the government has these massive tents where they're housing the military, and they also bring in people and they pay them to protest in favor of the government. And they're housing them all in these massive tents near the presidential palace, right? I haven't heard about any of this. In fact, I didn't hear about any of this until I was specifically talking to my friend from Serbia. So maybe it's more of a sign that we need to pay more attention to what else is going on in the world. As
Hmm.
much as we get caught up in this bubble in the UK or in the USA that things are staying as they are and nothing's changing, stuff's possible. The world is a constantly moving place, and as much as I joke and say nothing ever happens, stuff can happen.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I was also thinking too that like maybe like in terms of like the negativity too, I think like in the United States, I think it's easy to kind of fall into that kind of bubble, especially right now because of the scale and kind of like the quickness that things have been like kind of developing here. And so I think like a lot of people especially are kind of, tend to kind of focus in specifically here, like in the United States, because of the how it really kind of impacts people more. So kind of like in this country in the more like immediate sense, and kind of like the quickness kind of makes it hard to kind of like look away, especially when people like are being shot like in the streets and stuff, for example, or just kind of like ICE presence. Like I know locally, like families were abducted like close by to me, so it's kind of like it's definitely like kind of hard to observe, but I think you like what you said is important to kind of have to look out and kind of really see kind of the broader context of kind of like what is happening, kind of around the world and kind of, be involved on a more kind of global scale. So
And also, it's not trying to make things sound like they aren't bad in certain contexts, but to understand still how good we have it in the places that we're from. You know,
yeah,
could be it like you look at places like Somalia or Yemen or Sudan or the Congo or Haiti, could be worse.
yeah,
You could be.
for sure.
What was the name of that guy in Haiti? Is he still around? General Barbecue? Like when
Oh
one of
man,
the guys in charge of. Yeah, a guy nicknamed Barbecue. Right? When one of the dudes in charge, de facto in charge of your country, is named Barbecue due to his history of alleged cannibalism. I'd say that certainly takes the cake for stuff being
yeah,
bad a lot more than
I would
anything in
say
the
so.
UK or the USA. You know,
Definitely not something that I would want to.
yeah,
Not something I'd want to go meet.
like, like whatever. I don't know. Like when the nickname for what nicknames does Trump have? I've heard Drumpf be thrown around. I've heard Orange Man, but and as
Man,
much people don't like him, at least it's not a guy named Barbecue.
yeah. At least he's not eating people. So that's good.
Yeah, but anyway, here we're reaching that 1 hour runtime, and I've been making a conscious effort lately to try and stop doing episodes where I go 50% over my allotted time. So to wrap up, what would you like to say to the people to wrap up this episode here?
Uh, I mean, like, I guess, like, hmm. I guess, like, I mean, we're on like such like a negative topic, like you said. I think like to kind of like not lose hope. Like to get involved in things and kind of really, like be involved in like your community. I think that's like a very important thing. In any kind of scale or kind of organization or whatever you can really do. I think it's incredibly rewarding and something that is something that people should kind of pursue more. I think so.
Yeah, get involved. Like
Yeah.
I certainly need to consider more my sort of local university politics. I can't name a single student. I can name one student representative at my university, and that's because he really annoyed me once at a party. Like he wouldn't stop talking, and
Yeah.
that's not a good reason to have any knowledge of student politics, right? So yeah, get involved, pay attention, stay safe out there. So goodbye
Thank
to you.
you.
Thanks for coming on. All timer of an episode. Certainly great start to season 2, and goodbye.